So once you've had a reasonable population that's got through, it's just taken moisture off the predominant crop, which in this case we're talking about wheat, and that yield loss, let's call it 400 kilos at a $300 gross value per tonne. There's a big input there that they could have factored in. He's talking $120 cross return for a $30 input. It's just such a smart move, and there was a reason why we put it in the plan.
Hello and welcome back to Shared Ag Solutions by BCG. I'm Janine Batters. We're going to be speaking with Rik Maatmann, the branch manager for Nutrien Ag Solutions in Birchip. And you're an agronomist, Rik. Thanks for being here. Can you just tell us, just before we get into our episode, which is going to be talking about agronomy and how you can plan throughout the year to be more profitable and some of the tips that you have and advice for farmers. Before we get into that, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Janine. Thanks for having me on. Look, my background, I grew up on a dairy farm, went to the Trobe Uni, studied agriculture and business, really enjoyed my time there, did a harvest in Esperance and really enjoyed the broadacre side of farming. So ended up doing a graduate position with Nutrien, Landmark at the time, through Ballarat and Bendigo, and worked with Greg Toomey in Elmore. He was a really good agronomist, loved my time there, and got the opportunity to become an agronomist in Donald. Did that for 5 years, moved to North Queensland, spent a bit of time there managing a cane farm and doing agronomy there, and recently moved back 2.5 years ago to Birchip, and this is home now. Quite enjoy it here.
We're very lucky to have you, Rik. So my first question would be for you, why did you choose ag?
Look, growing up on a farm, it's obviously pretty close. Didn't enjoy the dairy farming side of it as much, just the intensity of it. Really enjoyed the profitability of it, but just wasn't for me. And I thought you're always better off to go and try something different before you come home on the farm. So that was the opportunity to go away and learn. Agriculture is just so dynamic, Janine. It's great to get out there and experience people's problems and help them with solutions. So that was the main reason.
I love that, Rik. I love also that you do have that background in farming, whether it's dairy farming or whatever. We're all the same, aren't we? We're all trying to grow food for the masses, really, and do that in a really profitable and sustainable way. So moving into planning, can you take me through how you do that planning with your growers for each year, for a whole year? How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to be honest, it's probably a very critical part of planning for that season. How do we do it at our branch in Nutrien? We do it individually with each customer, and we often invite key stakeholders, being like farm managers or key farm hands, in on that conversation as well. And we just listen to what those farmers want from that discussion. So we'll work through and hear what they want to get out of it, what their goals are. Quite commonly, it's financial driven, like you want to make money out of every crop, and if you're going to spell a paddock, it's for a clear reason. Other people want to just go through and have some fallow to take some risk management out of it. Everyone's got different ideas, and we're there to help them in directing them through a long-term plan that then allows them to control weeds in that plan, to get good economic outcomes out of that same plan, and take some strategic advice on board on how we actually should manage that.
Yeah, okay. When does that process start?
Look, it should start, we've already planned the year prior, basically just in rotation, but the inputs for this year start now. You know what I mean? If anyone got off the header, they normally take a bit of a break and then get into it. You've got the odd customer that wants to do it before harvest. But our industry is very dynamic, Janine. It's very hard to plan something properly, especially cash flows, with such a volatile urea market, for instance, and every other commodity we deal with at the moment.
So you're taking into account, what's come off after harvest. That really does help you with the planning for the following year, doesn't it? And I suppose prices, what farmers are getting at this time of year, what they've sold grain for at harvest. What do you really love about that process?
I just love the fact it sets a clear plan on how we move forward. Without that, it makes it extremely hard to forecast, procure, organise any demand or seasonal demand volatility throughout the year. So for us, it's key. Our key customers that farm plan with us know that volume's getting combined. We're pulling that together. we're going to our suppliers and saying we're going to need this at these times in the year, and we will get back to our farmers at strategic times where we think it's going to be short or whether it's getting close to the application period, and just double check. So do you want to turn this forecast into an order and lock it away? So that's probably the big advantage for us as agronomists / resellers. For the farmers, the big advantage is that step-by-step application, although it does change and has to be dynamic with weather conditions, it's all spelt out. They get a really good broad overview of what they're going to do in each paddock for the year and how the inputs are going to be placed in each paddock for specific reasons. For instance, annual ryegrass problems or wild radish problems in those paddocks. Well, we've already planned that out in their farm plan and know what sort of herbicides we're going to use to control those problems.
So the planning actually helps you as suppliers as well, because you're talking about chem inputs, fertiliser, fungicide, all those things. And if you know what the farmer, obviously fungicide, you don't know what the year's going to be, but by working with farmers, you're helping them, but you're also making sure that you can really support them by making sure you have the product in the shop when it's needed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we will have farmers that mightn't do a farm plan with us particularly, but they buy all their inputs off us, and they'll share a farm plan with us, and we'll manually add that into the accumulated volume and again provide the same service for them. There's two different stages here, right? You've got the procurement stage and the agronomic farm planning stage, but we do them both in the one process.
So how do you know? Because at this time of year you are planning, but I would imagine that you might even need to be thinking about fertiliser and chemical for you guys to get it into the shop before now. Like, is it all just based on the planning of your clients and what they need and then you get that in? Or are you looking at forecasts? How do you know how much? Because you don't want to have too much, but you also need to have enough so that farmers, they get it when they need it.
That is a great comment, and actually one of the hardest things for any supplier is to work through seasonal demand. Right now is a key example. We've had our third proper rain for the summer period, and the forecast was expecting a pretty dry summer. So all of our inputs for the summer weed control program are obviously going to become a little bit harder to get. We'd forecasted quite well on what we expected for this year, fastly consuming all that and have to go back to market and find some more. And that to me is something a farm plan cannot capture. We just don't know. So you need to have that dynamic ability to understand where your area is at and seasonally increase forecasts. I guess we've got the advantage of being agronomists. We're out in the paddock, we're watching this rain. We clearly know that, right, we're going to hold on the second knockdown now to get the next germination of crop. So we know a little bit closer in what's required than, say, a stay in the shop branch manager might. But ultimately, you're right, we're all in a world where we don't want to hold too much, especially these seasonal commodities like tricloper for melon control in the summer fallow. If you don't sell it now, you'll hold it for a clean 12 months and sell it next year. So there's a cost to carrying anything, and we don't want to over forecast either. Yeah,
that's true. And I was just thinking about that. I'm not an agronomist, Rik, but do some things have use-by dates?
Yeah, some things do, and probably that relates more to some fungicides that can be an issue year to year. In regards to everything else, it's never an issue in our network. We've got such a large network, we can send it anywhere in the country and just move it through. So we don't really have those issues. We're very aware of all the use-by dates, but no, mainly animal health products can have those issues, but a couple of fungicides, normally most of our products, if they're not used within a use-by date, you've really mucked up a forecast. So
that's really good to know. Do you recommend to farmers that they have a certain amount of chemical for this summer spraying that they weren't predicting, or fungicide that they weren't predicting, or are you just saying to your growers, don't worry about it, guys, we're really good at this, we're going to have it in the shop?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you're dead right in that those two commodities, glyphosate for one, everyone stores a lot of that on farm now. It's just very common that everyone wants to have a backup. We had a glyphosate outage a few years ago. Prices can vary between, high $3 to $10 plus. That's a massive difference on an average 2 litre a hectare application. Really blows that summer spraying out of the water if you're unlucky and have to procure it at $10. So what we say to our guys is, look, here's a good offer. We know the market's hereabouts. Are you interested in taking a volume of glyphosate now? This is an offer we've got. A lot of them take up on that and will put a couple of extra shuttles or maybe 10 or 20 extra shuttles in the shed and just have that for the summer program. That said, in years like this, I'm sure we'll exhaust those stocks and we'll still need to go back to market and find it. So you can't always plan for a 3-spray summer because our average is 1 to 1.5. So it's quite hard to manage. Fungicides are even harder. But again, a lot of proactive farmers, they'll just go straight to us and go, I want to use an SDHI fungicide. I know I want to use it at canopy closure. What do you recommend? What's the use rate? I've got 1,000 hectares to do. We'll just procure it, get it out on farm. They know they've got it. So that happens often. It just doesn't happen with all of our growers.
And is that where you would say that planning can really be profitable because they've got their plan and they know what to expect? They're probably going to spray their lentils before canopy closure, like you say. So you're just saying that perhaps in those circumstances, it does make sense to buy ahead, or is it just dependent on the grower?
Yeah, it definitely does in those circumstances. We go back to 2022, such a high pressure year. That fungicide had the highest return on investment that I've ever seen from an ag chem input into their farming system. So having it when you need it is critical, and yeah, it does add real value. At the same time, we try and be pretty squared away with our growers. If that commodity has a chance of falling in the 6 or 3 month period where they think they're going to hold it, we'll try and get the heads up on that and let them know that there might be a better opportunity. The product's still not short. Would you consider buying it later if we think there's a downside price pressure change coming? So
there's a lot of thinking involved, isn't there? As farmers, we're thinking about our farm and what we need to do. It's amazing to think, wow, you're doing this for so many farmers. You're thinking about so much stock. Like, it is a really big job. It's a big responsibility, isn't it? Now, what are some of the things that farmers can be thinking about now that they can put into their plans that would help them be more profitable, but perhaps they're not thinking about?
Yeah, a common one for us would be a 3-year strategy to problematic weeds. So quite often a farmer will be on the header and he'll be looking at what weeds are in front of him that year. And let's say they've got a problem with annual ryegrass, and we put together a really good plan in their lentils to control that annual ryegrass. And they get off the header and go, yep, the grass problem in this paddock's fixed. All right, that's not a problem. But I've seen a bit of radish get through, so next year we need to focus on radish. If they wrote that list against the last 3 years, we would know that the annual ryegrass seed burden would still carry over. We need to control that residual or the remaining annual ryegrass in that paddock as well as the radish and go through it. Now, we can do that with all the guys that we work closely with because we often know their paddocks that closely that we would understand that's still a risk because of the program we put in place last year. It's actually masked the fact that that has been controlled. I do think that it's important for growers to really focus on those weeds and know where they need to use premium chemistry and where they've got the problem under control. They can use some more cost-effective, older technology chemistry there and do just as equally as good of a job.
So you're saying maybe for those farmers to take a note, like perhaps even a physical note or a note in their phone and say, well, 2021 focusing on ryegrass, 2022 still focusing on ryegrass, but now we've got radish, 2023. Is that what you're saying? So that to have a sort of a track so that, you've got it in your mind, obviously, and you've got it in your farm plan, but keep a track of it for their thinking, but also remember that, yeah, we've still got that as a focus.
Yeah, exactly, Janine. So we want them to understand why we're putting the input into that paddock. And by just keeping a notepad, say you rule a few lines down the middle, 2021, 2022, 2023, and obviously when we go into 2024, what weeds we're seeing in those paddocks, it's quite simple to work through if you're getting in control of a weed or if it's getting on top of you. And often I'll say, put annual ryegrass down, give it a rating out of 5. 5's catastrophic, 1, just a couple of scatterings. You'll see then if you start putting that rating against it, what the weed pressure is doing and what the rotation's doing for you. And quite often if you do it over 3 or 4 years, you'll see that problem back in a cereal where it's hard to control and we'll understand it a lot better. We can do that on a pen and paper. A lot of our guys are starting to engage ag world a platform on their iPhone, and they can make notes in the paddock in the areas that are a problem and score what's bad there, and we can see that when it pops up on our desktop at work. So that makes it very interactive. You can't really lose that data. It's not like you can lose your notebook and all the information's gone. It's a good way of doing it, and there'd probably be 1,000 different ways of doing it. But just being observant of it, what we find is a major problem is we start off into a dry year, so like the start of 2023, for instance. A lot of people get nervous with the OPEX that's in the plan. A lot of the premium pre-emergent herbicides are actually quite dear per hectare, and they might start pulling them out and moving with some more robust rates of Treflan or Avadex or both. That said, that they don't have the duration. Later on, the ryegrass, the late germination of ryegrass comes through. There's a reason why we had premium pre-emergence in those paddocks, and that then counteracts it. When we have the problem come through again, we can have a chat about it. I think if they had it written down or stored more in memory, they would actually understand why those paddocks are critical and why we've got to stay pretty fixed to a farm plan, because otherwise you get these weed blowouts and you chase them for another 3 to 5 years.
And that's really where you guys would come in too, and I suppose any agronomist, is to really help the farmer, because they're dealing with so much, aren't they? They've got so many things, as you say, you keep saying it's such a dynamic thing. So you're saying that if farmers can just take that, like little 1%ers, I suppose, like they finish that, jump off the harvester in that paddock. And I was even thinking like a Google Docs or something straight away when you're saying the notepad. I'm thinking, I just want to see something that Rik can just see. I don't have to send it to him. Saves me a job. But whatever it is that you're using, but to spend that little 1% time, that's actually could mean that you are a lot more profitable in the long term, because I mean, you've got it in your mind, but if perhaps the farmer, you're saying, maybe forgets about the issue because they can't see it, or they've got another issue that they're focusing on because there's so much going on, that they might, if they keep track of the ryegrass that was there in 2021, then it's actually going to, well, I'm asking you this question, potentially save them more money down the track, because one, they're probably not going to have to use as much chemistry later, and also perhaps it's not going to be taking that moisture out of the ground. Am I understanding that right? Yeah,
correct. The input in the chemistry is the least of the two evils. Let's call that $30 input for, say, Secura in 2024. It wouldn't even measure up to the yield loss that weed outbreak has made in that crop. So once you've had a reasonable population that's got through, it's just taken moisture off the predominant crop, which in this case we're talking about wheat, and that yield loss, let's call it 400 kilos at a $300 gross value per tonne. There's a big input there that they could have factored in. He's talking $120 cross return for a $30 input. It's just such a smart move, and there was a reason why we put it in the plan. That was it. So I think it's all right to make those mistakes. It's good to go back and look back on it and understand what's gone wrong, instead of just being frustrated that the weeds might still be coming through year on year, and really make an understanding of what weed species have longer viability in the soil, which ones are shorter, and which ones we really have to focus on their specific paddocks. And I don't see a lot of that, Janine. It's funny, you have a lot of people that do a blanket recommendation over 10 or 12 wheat paddocks. This is what we're going to do on our wheat this year. And I think where it's easier, makes it very consistent for the grower to go and mix that up and go and sow all his wheat. Often there's a little bit more to it. It can add a lot of value to the grower.
There's always a little bit more to it, isn't there, Rik? I think that's a really valuable one. So taking note of what's in the paddock, what else do you think would help farmers to be more profitable that perhaps they're not thinking about at this time of the year in terms of agronomy?
Yeah, clearly at the moment it's nutrition. So we're seeing the whole Wimmera Mallee, large percentage of the wheat delivered has been low protein. No one could have expected that last yield saving rain that we got. It added so much yield on top of what would have been an average year, that to have enough nitrogen to get protein through that volume of wheat throughout this area would have been near on impossible. Even if you had perfect forecasting and you had a bit of a stockpile at home, trying to find the right rain to put that out on would have been hard work at the end of our season. That said, we have absolutely emptied the bucket. We do a lot of soil testing throughout this area. BCG also do a lot of soil testing through this area that we have a look at certain times. There's not a lot of residual N left. There's been a lot of P removed, and I think we just have to look at it holistically. Like we work into a situation now where this will be, 4.5 good years out of 5, and some of them extremely good. There's been a lot of product removed from each paddock, and we really need to get back to nuts and bolts and work out, albeit our phosphate price is still high, we need to get a lot of that back into the system, because at the moment we're really removing more than we're replacing. So having a good look at that, doing more soil tests, asking himself the question, if we don't actually lift our P rates, what are we leaving on the table? Dan Toohey said it in one of your earlier podcasts, if you're going to hit the top 25 percentile of growers, you really need to make sure that you're growing those crops and giving them what they need to grow. And we work with our growers to make sure they understand that and leave the choice with them, because everything's got an input cost. But at the same time, it's quite often, if you can explain it and visualise it, they take it on board.
And that's where those soil tests can be really useful, can't they? Because I think once you see it and you see the data, and I know that it can be a really painful job, because you're doing it and it's hot, and that's probably me. That's maybe why I'm not an agronomist, Rik. But I think there's so much value, and I think if they're doing the soil test, that's a really tangible way, and that's where that you can plan better, can't you?
Yeah, exactly. And I would just throw out there for all our listeners, there'll be that many growers out there that have been emailed a soil test, and they've gone and paid money to get that done, and it's gone through to whoever's done the soil test and sent it back at them. Always organised to come in, have a sit-down meeting with them. We try and do it out on farm where we can, during the, either in the shop or on farm, wherever we can catch up with them in person and explain that soil test. Run through it, really work through what the key drivers of their yield are, what we see as some of the key limitations in that soil test, and what our strategy should be for that paddock moving forward. So often you get a soil test sent through, and I know I've seen this many a times when I was managing that farm in North Queensland on my dad's farm, and with a lot of friends that are farming. They'll just get it and look at the one factor on there that might be, right, what's my total N? Where there's a lot of other information on that soil test, like pH and a lot of different soil constraints that we need to work at. Exchangeable sodium contents, a big one for us here around the Birchip area, that can add a lot of value more than just a nitrogen test moving forward. So I think before you get them done, make sure you know what you're sampling for, and ensure that agronomist or that consultant is coming out and talking to you about them, so you fully get your value worth out of that soil test.
Because otherwise it really means nothing, does it?
It's something you put in the file. I reckon they all get filed, Janine, but it does mean nothing. Like, it adds no value. And it's all good to rely on your agronomist to do that information for you, but there's a power in knowing, and if you know your fertility of your soil, you really understand why you're making these inputs. So I think it's really good to show engagement and want to understand those soil tests.
I'm hearing that a lot. From you. I can tell you really care about your work, because, you're actually really wanting the first two things that we've talked about, what farmers can do in the planning. You're really saying the more engagement that growers can show in the planning stage, but also in understanding their farm. And the farmers are really good at that, but you're obviously just trying to encourage them to build on that, the better they're going to be able to plan, and then obviously the more profitable, fingers crossed, they're going to be able to be.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, farmers are excellent at that. They know their soil type variability extremely well, but when you put yourself in their position, they are just so busy. They've got so many operational priorities that go ahead of understanding the soil test, that you really just want to make sure that you understand that demand that's on them at key points of the year, and just making sure you've got a bit of an open schedule for when it works for them to run through it, where they're engaged and they're not stressed about other operational issues.
And they've got a clear head.
Yeah, which is a great point of time for us now. Apart from all the summer spraying that we're getting over, most people have had a bit of a break now. They've had a Christmas holiday, done a bit of summer spraying. We've got some wet weather. It's a key time to sit down and really nut out where our low-hanging fruit is and focus on what we need to do to get improvements into 2024.
So what else, Rik? What else can farmers do at this time of the year to help them plan to be more profitable in terms of agronomy?
Yeah, it's probably just baselining the crops they grow and where their OPEX expenditure goes to in those crops.
What do you mean by OPEX?
So all the operational inputs. So they'll know a lot of their machinery operational inputs more than I would, but understand where their ag chem and fungicides are, where their fertiliser or nutritional costs are, and where their seed costs are. Because as soon as you understand that well, you can make a bit of a decision on what crops are going to impact the bottom line. I love it. I absolutely love the lentil rotation for us. One, because it's profitable. Two, because people think that, the fungicides, it's so dear to grow. Like lentils, a very high input lentil crop would be $350 a hectare. A high input canola crop would be $520 a hectare. And the return is just chalk and cheese. Like if you can go 2.5 tonne of lentils, that's an extremely good return in comparison to 2.5 tonne of canola. So making sure that we know we're saving, a difference there might be $240 a hectare saving in nutrition. We don't have all the urea and all the SOA that might go on a canola crop, but making sure we invest in critical stages of the fungicide regime in those lentils and get some trace elements onto it, really ensure that the health of those plants stay as high as we can lift them to points where we'll get dry periods. That's what knocks the lentil crop around for us in our environment normally, apart from 2022 where we had prolonged waterlogging, very, very uncommon for us. So just getting that nutrition and that disease management right allows the plant to be in a healthy state to cope with that a lot better than if there's an underlying level of ascochyta in them, grey mould, we haven't got enough zinc into them, other issues like that. So that to me is something that we work together and we talk about every year at the farm planning stage. How are lentils going for you? Where do you see the fit? Breeding has been unreal. Like a lot of companies have come in, private companies, and bred really good lentil varieties for our area. The nutrition's the next big step for us to try and get right, keep that up, and make sure that we manage the disease risk in those lentils accordingly. And often it's exactly that, it's de-risking it. In a dry year, you might see zero difference between a premium SDHI and an older form technology there in the fungicides. But in a wet year, the yield difference is huge. So making sure we've got the protection in that year, that's critical.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because it seems like it would be an obvious thing to do, to know, how this crop makes me this much. I'm going to make sure I harvest this crop first. But again, farming is so busy that just knowing those costs and knowing what it's costing you to grow, what it's costing you to manage, what you're selling it for, can be a really valuable tool in planning for profit. But I guess also in helping you to plan for your priorities too.
Yeah, exactly. Like a key example there again will be pulling out a canola going to lentils. It looks a bit dry. I don't want to expense that deer hybrid canola seed. Canola seed per hectare is going to be about $60 a hectare, and depending on what variety and what rate, obviously. Lentils at a commodity price where they are now, by the time they're clean, that's $55 a hectare. So although you haven't actually had to go to the bank, take that money out and go and buy the canola seed, the opportunity cost to sell those lentils at $1,000 or $900 like they were last year when we were cleaning that seed was quite high. And you have a look at that and say, right, where's the risk mitigation there? It's only cash flow. Because you could have actually sold the lentils that you've sown and you've gone and bought the canola seed. The canola can add a lot of advantages agronomically into the rotation. So just understanding that in your farm plan, just have a clean look at it and go, look, what's my sowing cost? And it will segregate it in an Ag World farm plan down the bottom. It will say chemicals, fertiliser, seed. And you'll be able to flick through each paddock and have a look at what the cost per hectare is and really just familiarise yourself with that. Understand if you're going to make any dynamic changes on the move, why you're doing them and what actual advantage that will have to your business.
And if you're not using Ag World, you can still do that, right?
Exactly. Yep. Any different platform can do that. Actually, I'm sure every platform could do that, or you could do it in an Excel format. So
yeah. Okay. And so when you are thinking about those opportunity costs, like you were talking about, how do they factor into your farm plans because, sometimes it's, canola's really high or China aren't taking our barley. How does those kind of aspects affect you're planning with farmers?
Yeah, I honestly think you have to take it all on board. It's the difference between a good farm plan, a good agronomist-grower relationship is that you are dynamic. It's easy to set one rotation and say we're going to stick at this for 10 years and we'll fix all our problems. But everyone does it to make money. And I'm of the opinion that there are times where plans need to change. And quite often, one of the big things we do is we mightn't set goals, but we set expectations. And that's as much the grower setting an expectation with us as us setting it with them, that in this scenario, I will be pulling out my canola and I will be going to wheat. So then from a supply point of view, we can have a chat with them and say, that's all right. At this date, we need to go firm on canola orders just to make sure we get the seed. If you don't want it after then, we'll try and move it on to other stores or into other areas. If we can't move it on, you might have to hold on to it. But don't use that as a reason not to make that dynamic change that you need and move back to wheat. If that's something we've discussed and we've got a plan on how to control the weeds in wheat and it works, we'll just move into it because we're all there to make money. And to be honest, the growers really have to be in this area, I feel, with the drier climate and some pretty rough dry years that we've had in the past. You just got to have it in the back of your mind that we're not going to be running decile 5s and above forever. So
planning to be flexible.
That's right, yep.
So do you supply the farmers that you work with, obviously you supply them with a big farm plan and this is what you're going to grow in paddock A and this is what you're going to grow in consultation with them. Do you supply kind of a summary, like you're talking about it's in your head, but is there a document or something that as like the 3 main areas that you're focusing on, or would you recommend that? Because I know that throughout the year it can all of a sudden you're focusing on stripe rust and you're focusing on the fungicide, and it could very easily forget some other goal that you had. Or is that something that you would recommend? Do you know what I mean?
The short answer to that is I don't recommend it. And the reason for it is it just needs to be that dynamic. It's that much of a dynamic market. And you have a wet year, we pump a lot of funding into managing rust. Now, that's great because it was a priority, but the priority doesn't carry from year to year always. And regularly, after a wet year, you don't have an equally wet year. We're lucky to be in a bit of a rotation of wet years here, Janine. Great, let's keep them coming. I don't want to wish them away. But also I see a bit of a risk with moving to longer season varieties, expecting these higher yields, setting up a system for something that has a rainfall of above 300 mils. That's just not our bread and butter. So we need to be mindful when we're doing that. We're doing it because we've got stored moisture. We're getting good at storing moisture and we're expecting an average or an above average year. But be flexible enough again to revert back and potentially have a couple of varieties there that we can swap into some shorter varieties, especially with our barleys now, to make sure that we can maximise yield in those dry years. So in regards to setting goals and applying some focus to key topics and key areas of improvement for the following year, one thing we find really successful is running pre-season grower meetings where we get everyone in and have a group meeting, discuss some differences between combined soil tests, actually visualise that up on a PowerPoint presentation, run through some of that new chemistry, really understand how it works, like what sort of rainfall required to activate it, where its best fit is, understand what some of the UV breakdowns are on those chemistries so that we can apply them in the best manner. Key example being the use of Secure in our system. Our biggest limitation is to get enough rainfall to wash it in before the ryegrass has germinated and got to a 2 to 3 leaf stage where it's hard to pull back down. Now, one of the big advantages of having that meeting is we can explain that to growers, and when that rain comes 2 weeks out from sowing, they already remember that one of the best use applications is to put it out in front of rain. Once it's incorporated, you'll have no UV breakdown, there'll be no issue there. So they really de-risk their system by understanding the chemistry, and we can do that by getting across a large amount of people in one facility, which is normally a busy time in front of sowing, or a month out from sowing. We do set goals with our growers and really understand what advantages they can add to their system, and give them some opportunities of different things to think about, all the different varieties. Last year we went through a sustainability project and understood what that looks like. We've got a sustainability arm in Nutrien that can come out and work with our growers and really add some value. So Todd Price stood up there and went through an example and understood what benchmarking looks like, made it very clear to our growers that we don't advise that they sell any carbon credits they might have, but understand them and work towards different marketing options that can be assigned with them. So yeah, we had those chats, really make some awareness about that, but in terms of putting a front page on each farm plan, it's not something we've looked at, and I think it would be a risk as it moves into a dry year. Those goals just change really quickly.
It sounds again from what you're saying that it is really about that engagement and that education and that understanding that you want growers to have, and you want to support them to have, so they can be involved with the planning. Would you say that those planning meetings that you're having are also useful for growers to connect with each other and understand, well, I might not have had that issue on my farm, but the neighbour next door has had it, like to get a better understanding of the issues in the area as a whole?
Yeah, and it's any interactive discussion you can have is always 10 times better than a potential lecture. There's a lot of interaction in the team. We also bring in people that they wouldn't have seen much of, like our finance department, to just break it up, stop the mundane agronomy discussion and chuck one in there about cash flow and how to manage products like our PPP prepaid system, or how all-in-one facilities work. It's interesting to growers, but also breaks it up, and there's always a lot of questions, which is great, and it's great when the odd grower wants to answer a question with their experiences as well.
You say, I'm sure it wouldn't be mundane, Rik. I can't imagine it being mundane. I've really enjoyed myself today. Is there anything else that you think would be valuable for farmers to know at this time of year, planning agronomically to be more profitable in 2024? Yeah,
look, I think to me it's just understanding all that technology that's out there. It's great for us as agronomists. We try and get all over it. There's a lot of weedits and optical sprayers, I should say, in this area. And just working with them on what the best fit is. You often need that blanket application in the summer spray, and then you follow in with those repetitive optical sprays. Understanding the time to brand out and really understanding how they work and the sensitivities, and each machine, each different make is different in the way it works and can work in different scenarios. So that's one that I find very fascinating, and we work together with our growers to get that right. And above that, we're only one small piece of the puzzle, Janine. Like, obviously, you've got all of the financial planning side of things. You've got commodity management, which is pretty critical. And understanding a big one that growers will make decisions on, because they really get their harvesting capacity and harvesting equity at the end of the year. Just understanding that, can I afford to have such a big barley program in? And if I do, how do I maintain that yield potential when there's a risk of head loss or brackling? That's probably a big one that growers are really good at working at, but it's good to explain that to us, the agronomist, and say, look, I'm just uncomfortable with that amount of barley. Like, it's going to be a logistical nightmare to try and get it off. It's going to come in around the same time, and unless we windrow it, I can't see the fit. This year, windrowing hasn't been all it's made up to be, with some wet windrows, so there's limitations around that as well. That said, I think that's probably the stuff that the growers know a lot better than we do, and they need to explain to us. So it's really working together and understanding each other, but also understanding, I think what I've been hearing throughout our conversation is for farmers to invest the time to talk to you and to go to those meetings and learn the understanding or the education, or even just that they know a lot of it, but just putting it down in AgWorld or putting it down in Google Docs can make all the difference. Yep, just making sure you note it out and take it to that meeting, and makes it all a lot easier.
Cool. Thank you so much, Rik. I know you're super busy, particularly at this time of year when you would be doing a lot of farm planning. So I really appreciate that. Thanks again.
Good on you, Janine. Thanks again to the support from BCG, and it's been a pleasure.
That was Rik Maatman sharing his agronomic tips for planning for profit this season. If you enjoyed it, we'd love it if you could rate us 5 stars. Don't forget to hit follow and share it with your friends. Until next time.